In 1950, the average American home cost about $7,400. And it wasn't some cramped little box. You got a spacious yard, gleaming hardwood floors, and neighbors who actually knew your name. Communities, whether black or white, felt tighter, more connected. Today, that amount wouldn't even get you the down payment on a second-hand shed in most cities. In 1955, a gallon of gas was just 29. $5 filled your tank to the brim and still left enough change for an ice-cold Coke and a pack of gum. And you didn't pump it yourself. A smiling young attendant, sometimes even a teen working his first job, would top you off, wipe your windshield, and call you sir like it was second nature. That same year, the Chevy Bel Air hit the streets and stole the spotlight everywhere it went. Two-tone paint, sparkling chrome, and a roaring V8. It looked like it was flying even when standing still. Owning one wasn't just transportation. It was a badge of success. In 1952, Mr. Potato Head became the very first toy ever advertised on TV. Back then, you had to supply your own real potato. A plastic version came later. Try handing a kid today a raw potato and telling them, "Here, have fun with this." In 1950, the U.S. population was just over 150 million, barely half of today. Towns were cozier, streets were calmer, and you actually recognized faces at the grocery store. America felt big, but not so big that you got lost in it. In the 50s, you didn't bother locking your doors. Not because crime didn't exist, but because trust still did. If someone knocked, you welcomed them in. If they didn't knock, it was probably your cousin dropping off the ladder he borrowed last week. No one worried. Life just moved differently. Sunday dinner wasn't negotiable. The whole family gathered. Grandparents, cousins, and that one noisy uncle who told the same story every week. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, and that infamous cello mold no one liked, but everyone took a spoonful of anyway. It wasn't about the meal. It was about the moments. Drive-in theaters were at their height in the 1950s. You'd pull up in your car, hang the clunky speaker on your window, and watch a double feature under a blanket of stars. If you were lucky, the popcorn from the snack bar wasn't burnt. And maybe, just maybe, she'd reach over and hold your hand. The TV dinner made its debut in 1953. It came in a shiny foil tray, cost $98, and promised a full meal with 0 dishes to wash. Families loved it, and no one called it processed food back then. It was just convenient and a little exciting. In 1954, the first color TV hit the market. But at about $1,000, nearly $10,000 in today's money, it was a luxury. Most households stuck with black and white sets. And when someone in the neighborhood finally got a color TV, half the block would show up to watch. The interstate highway system didn't exist until President Eisenhower signed it into law in 1956. Before that, road trips were a real gamble. You needed paper maps, spare tires, and a good dose of patience. And if your car broke down in the middle of nowhere, you'd better hope you packed sandwiches. In 1954, Elvis Presley released his first single, "That's All Right." At the time, some people thought his moves were downright scandalous. Too much hip, not enough gospel. But many black artists before him had already pioneered those same sounds. Elvis just brought them into the mainstream. For teenagers, Elvis wasn't just a singer. He was a jolt of pure energy. Every song, every hip shake, felt like it was rewriting the rules of the country, one vinyl at a time. It was small, cheap, and open 24 hours a day. Truckers, teenagers, and early birds all found a place at the counter. It didn't matter who you were. If you liked waffles and coffee, you belonged black, white, young, old. In 1953, the first successful open-heart surgery using a heart-lung machine took place. It sounded like something from a sci-fi novel, stopping the heart, repairing it, and starting it up again. But it worked, and it redefined what doctors believed could be done. Back then, house keys were often shared with neighbors when you went out of town. You'd give yours to the Johnsons next door so they could feed the cat. No alarms, no cameras, just trust, and maybe a fresh pie waiting on the counter when you got home. Kids in the 1950s spent their days outside. No phones, no tablets, no just stick ball, bicycles, and coming home when the streetlights flicked on. You knew every kid on your block, black or white, and somehow nobody ever complained about being bored. Coca-Cola still came in thick glass bottles, and vending machines only took nickels. You'd slide the bottle out of the cooler, pop the cap, and that first sip would almost burn in the best way. Cold, fizzy, perfect. No plastic, no diet versions, just the real thing. And hey, if you're feeling even a little nostalgic right now, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because there's a lot more where this came from. In the 50s, your phone was a rotary dial bolted to the wall. Mess up the last number, and you had to start all over again. Long-distance calls were an event. And if the neighbor picked up on the party line, well, so much for privacy. No one needed a gym membership in the 1950s. Daily chores kept you in shape. Mowing the lawn with a push mower, chopping wood for the stove, hanging laundry on the line, hauling buckets of water. That was your workout. And somehow, Grandpa still had better calves than you do now. Flying was something you dressed up for. Men wore suits, women wore gloves. It wasn't just transportation. It was an occasion. You got real meals, legroom, and warm smiles from the stewardess. Nobody showed up in sweatpants or tried to bring a goat on board. In the 50s, a man's toolbox was a badge of pride. Heavy steel, no flashy labels, just years of grease, dents, and know-how. You didn't throw things away, you fixed them. And if your neighbor's mower broke, you didn't call a repairman. You walked over and helped. In the early 1950s, polio was still a real fear. Kids were told to stay out of public pools during outbreaks. Then in 1955, Jonas Salk's vaccine arrived, and it felt like the whole country exhaled for the first time in years. If your family owned a station wagon, you were living well. You piled into the back without seat belts, windows rolled down, the dog drooling in the wind, Dad yelling over the radio, and Mom passing sandwiches from the cooler. It wasn't fancy, but it was freedom. The neighborhood barbershop was where stories were told, hair was cut, and gossip floated under the buzz of clippers. You didn't need Yelp. You had Lou, the guy who'd been cutting your hair since Eisenhower was elected and still charged $2. There was no GPS. If you got lost, you stopped and asked for directions. And people actually helped, usually with a pencil on the back of a napkin. You trusted strangers, and they didn't send you the wrong way just for a laugh. When the ice cream truck came rumbling down the street, kids didn't just smile. They sprinted barefoot, quarters in hand, shouting for bomb pops and drumsticks. Nobody cared about sugar or calories. It was all about that first bite, half melted, the sun on your face, and sticky fingers for the rest of the afternoon. Back then, high school shop class meant learning real-life skills. Welding, woodworking, engines, the good stuff. You didn't just leave with a diploma. You left knowing how to fix a lawnmower, build a table, or patch a roof if you had to. In 1951, the first nuclear power plant switched on in Idaho. It didn't power a city, just 4 light bulbs, but it was the spark of something huge. America believed the future was atomic, and that was both thrilling and a little scary. Toasters, blenders, waffle irons. In the 1950s, these weren't just kitchen tools. They were chrome-covered symbols of modern living. Your appliances looked like they belonged on a spaceship. And if something broke, Dad grabbed a screwdriver and fixed it with patience and grit. Kids didn't wear helmets when they rode bikes. No elbow pads, no foam padding, just scraped knees and streamers on the handlebars. If you crashed, you limped home, and Mom dabbed iodine on the wound like it was magic water. And somehow you survived. Television signed off at night. Around midnight, the national anthem played. The screen went black and static took over. No late-night shows, no infomercials. That was your cue to turn it off. Or risk Dad waking up and yelling, "Turn that thing off." In the 1950s, car keys were optional. Some pickups didn't even have door locks. You parked, tucked the keys under the visor, and no one touched it. Today, you need a password to start a microwave. Back then, trust was stronger than tech. If you got sick in the 50s, you didn't search symptoms online. You called the family doctor, and he showed up at your house with a black bag, a thermometer, and a calm voice that instantly made you feel better. Penny candy actually cost a penny. Tootsie Rolls, Mary Janes, bubblegum all lined up in glass jars behind the counter. 5 cents made you feel like royalty. It wasn't just about the sugar. It was about the thrill of choosing. At home, the thermostat didn't change much. You wore a sweater in winter, opened a window in summer, and complained exactly once before Dad said, "It builds character." And you believed him because you didn't want to be called soft in front of your siblings. Sunday morning radio was for gospel music and the news. No scrolling, no playlists, just voices on the air and the sound of bacon sizzling in the kitchen. Dad read the paper. Mom poured coffee. And the world felt slow in the best way possible. In the 1950s, most milk, butter, and meat came from nearby farms. Grocery stores didn't offer 20 brands of everything, just one that worked. Nobody asked if food was organic. It simply was. Cigarette ads were everywhere. On TV, in magazines, even in the doctor's office. Some brands claimed they were good for digestion. It sounds wild now, but back then lighting up was just part of life. Even your boss smoked at his desk. Kids respected their teachers, or at least feared the ruler. Discipline wasn't negotiable. You stood when called on, said, "Yes, ma'am," and kept your mouth shut unless you wanted trouble. You didn't throw things away. You fixed them. Radios got new tubes. Shoes got new solace. Toasters got rewired. Keeping things running wasn't about being cheap. It was about knowing how. When something finally broke beyond repair, you felt its loss. A man with a briefcase and a hat was part of the morning landscape. He kissed his wife goodbye, caught the 8:15 train, and worked downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. And every evening he came home like clockwork, tired but proud. The Jell-O salad had its moment of glory. Lime gelatin with cottage cheese, fruit suspended like it defied gravity. Maybe some shredded carrots for texture. Nobody really liked it, but everyone took a spoonful out of tradition. When neighbors had a new baby, the whole street showed up with casseroles and a hand-me-down crib. No baby registries, no online wish lists, just neighbors and friends helping each other. The new dad was expected to hand out cigars, and the new mom didn't step outside for at least a week. Roller skates had metal wheels that roared like thunder on the pavement. You tightened them with a skate key that hung from a string around your neck. If the toe clip snapped mid-ride, you walked home barefoot, socks stained with blood, still grinning the whole way. Every diner had a jukebox, either tucked into the booth or standing by the door. Drop in a dime, punch in a number, and watch the gears whir to life. Chuck Berry, Patsy Cline, or Buddy Holly would crackle through the speakers, and suddenly everyone at the table went quiet to listen. Paper boys were the definition of hustle. Up before sunrise, lugging a heavy canvas bag on one shoulder, hurling newspapers with perfect aim. Rain or shine, no excuses. If you wanted money as a kid in the 50s, you didn't stream or sell candy bars. You delivered. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first satellite ever to orbit the Earth. It was the size of a beach ball, but it sent shockwaves through America. The space race had begun, and suddenly science became a much bigger word in every U.S. classroom, including schools in black communities that had long been underfunded but full of ambition. A movie ticket in 1950 cost just 48 cents. For under $1, you got a seat, popcorn, and maybe a cartoon before the feature. No pre-booking, no scrolling through trailers. You just showed up, picked whatever was playing, and it was almost always worth it. In 1953, Watson and Crick revealed the double helix structure of DNA. Most people had no idea what it meant, but it would eventually change medicine, science, and even criminal investigations. Back then, it was just a strange diagram in a science journal. A brand new Ford F-100 in the early 1950s cost under $1,500. No touchscreens, no Bluetooth, just solid steel, an AM radio, and a bench seat wide enough for 3 grown men and a dog. If something broke, you fixed it yourself. The Korean War began in 1950 and ended in 1953. Over 1.7 million Americans served, including many black soldiers who returned home to a country still struggling to recognize their service. It didn't get the same attention as World War II, but it left a mark on countless families. For many veterans, it was a cold, brutal fight they rarely spoke of afterward. Most American homes in the 1950s didn't have air conditioning. You stayed cool with a fan, a tall glass of lemonade, and maybe a nap on the porch. If it got really hot, you slept in the basement. Nobody complained. It was just summer. Marilyn Monroe wasn't just a movie star. She was the movie star. In 1955, she started her own production company, almost unheard of for a woman at the time. To some, she was a blonde bombshell. Behind the scenes, she was sharp, ambitious, and refused to play by Hollywood's rules. Most homes had just one bathroom, often painted in pastel pink, mint green, or baby blue. The toilet, the tub, and the tiles all matched. If you had 3 kids to bathe, it was a military operation. Oldest first, youngest last, same water for all. In 1958, the microchip was invented. At the time, no one outside a lab paid much attention. But it would lay the foundation for computers, cell phones, and nearly everything we use today. Back then, people were still more impressed by automatic garage doors. American Bandstand went national in 1957, hosted by clean-cut Dick Clark. Teens in saddle shoes and poodle skirts danced while parents frowned from the kitchen doorway. It wasn't just a TV show. It defined what cool looked like across the country. And black artists like Chubby Checker would later shake up the stage with moves and sounds that crossed every line. If you wanted to cool off in the summer, you didn't join a luxury gym. You went to the community pool. The chlorine was strong enough to bleach your hair. Lifeguards had zero patience, and somehow every kid still cannonballed into the deep end. In 1958, the hula hoop hit store shelves and sold 25 million units in just 4 months. Kids spun them in driveways, schoolyards, and parks until they were dizzy. Neighborhood contests popped up overnight, and parents secretly tried them after, Dark usually pulling a muscle in the process. Homemade ice cream wasn't just dessert. It was a summer ritual. You poured in the rock salt, cranked the heavy handle until your arms ached, and hoped it froze just right. When it did, it was the coldest, creamiest ice cream you'd ever taste. Nothing store-bought could compete. Rock and roll didn't just arrive. It exploded. Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and Elvis sounded like nothing else on the radio. Parents panicked. Preachers warned against it. And teenagers, they turned it up louder. For the first time, music felt dangerous and fun. Furniture shopping wasn't done online. You went to the local department store, tested every couch, and probably got offered a cup of coffee. The salesman lived a few streets away, and if something broke, he came over to fix it. McDonald's had just begun franchising in the 1950s. The menu had 9 items, including a 15-cent hamburger and 10-cent fries. No apps, no delivery. You walked up to the window, paid in coins, and ate your burger on the hood of your car, and it was perfect. House calls from salesmen were just part of everyday life. Vacuums, encyclopedias, brushes, you name it. Salesmen wore suits, flashed big smiles, and gave live demonstrations right in your living room. Sometimes Mom bought something. Sometimes she didn't, but she always offered them coffee. It was just the polite thing to do. In 1959, Hawaii became the 50th state. For many Americans, it felt like another world. Beaches, volcanoes, hula skirts. Postcards from paradise started showing up in mailboxes everywhere. It was America's newest state, and suddenly everyone wanted to go. Typewriters clacked away in offices, classrooms, and home studies. If you made a mistake, you used whiteout or started over. And nothing matched the sound of hitting return. That sharp ding and the smooth slide meant you were in the zone. On Halloween night, kids didn't buy costumes. They made them. Old bed sheets, cardboard robots, burnt cork smudges for a cowboy beard. You walked from house to house with a pillowcase. No parents in sight, just kids, candy, and a night that felt like magic. In the 1950s, TVs weren't on stands. They were the furniture. Heavy wooden cabinets with legs and speaker cloth fronts. When it broke, Dad didn't toss it. He called the repairman who showed up with a toolbox and a cigarette. Men wore hats because that's just what you did. Fedoras, flat caps, pork pies. You put it on before leaving the house, tipped it when greeting someone, and removed it indoors without thinking. Women curled their hair with metal rollers and dried it under giant helmet dryers straight out of a sci-fi movie. Beauty salons smelled like hairspray, perm solution, and the day's gossip. It wasn't just about looks. It was a place to talk, especially for black women, whose salons were also safe spaces to share life, laughter, and local news. In 1957, a little-known author named Dr. Seuss released The Cat in the Hat. It used just 236 words to help kids learn to read. It didn't just sell. It made story time wild, fun, and unforgettable. Postcards were a big deal. Even a trip 2 towns over meant sending one back home with "Thinking of You" scribbled on the back. They cost just a few cents, but people kept them like treasures. Bank hours were strict. If you didn't get there by 3:00 p.m. Friday, you were broke until Monday. No ATMs, no banking apps, just a teller behind glass and the clunk of a stamp marking your deposit. In 1955, Disneyland opened in California, and Walt Disney himself walked the park on opening day. It had only 18 rides, a plumber's strike, and asphalt melting in the heat, but it still became the happiest place on earth. School desks still had inkwells, even though kids were using ballpoint pens. The little holes stayed like relics from the past, and you'd poke pencils through them, wondering how anyone wrote with a feather. Sunday church wasn't optional. It was the anchor of the week. Families dressed up. Kids sat still mostly. And afterward, everyone shook hands before heading home to roast chicken. It wasn't just religion. It was routine. Encyclopedias were the internet of the 1950s. A salesman brought the full set to your door, and parents paid in monthly installments. If you needed a school report, those books were your only source. Lunchboxes were metal and built to survive a playground war. They had Roy Rogers, Hopalong Cassidy, or Howdy Doody on the side. And inside was a bologna sandwich, an apple, and maybe a thermos of milk. Nobody traded lunches unless Oreos were involved. The first modern credit card, Diners Club, launched in 1950. It started with just a few restaurants, but it sparked a revolution in how Americans, black and white, began to spend, travel, and dream bigger. It started for businessmen to pay for meals without cash. By the end of the decade, more people signed up and many forgot to read the fine print. In 1951, the first coast-to-coast live TV broadcast aired. President Truman spoke from the White House, and the entire country watched at the same time. One screen, one nation, one shared moment. Yard games were everywhere. Horseshoes, jacks, marbles, jump rope, and lawn darts made of real metal. No instructions needed. Kids made the rules and played until dark black and white kids alike, side by side in some towns, though not all. Canned food was king. Spam, condensed soup, fruit cocktail with one lonely cherry. Pantries were stocked like mini fallout shelters. It wasn't fancy, but it fed a family of 5 on one paycheck. Bar soap was the default. Irish Spring, Life Buoy, Dial. Every bathroom had a washcloth and a drawer full of half-melted pink and green soap slivers stuck together like glue. Kodak's Brownie cameras made photography affordable for everyone. Suddenly, birthdays, beach trips, and BBQs were captured in grainy black and white. If your finger wasn't in the frame, it was a good picture. Every home had ashtrays, glass, ceramic, even built into furniture. Guests smoked at the dinner table, in the car, even in the doctor's waiting room. Nobody thought twice. Smoke was just part of the scenery. TV shows ended with a moral. Lassie, the Lone Ranger, Father knows best. Be kind. Tell the truth. Don't fall in the well. Simple lessons, but they stuck. Layaway meant you didn't take it home until it was paid in full. No credit, no interest, just patience. And when you finally brought it home, it mattered. In 1951, direct dial calls became possible. Before that, you needed an operator to connect you across the country. Suddenly, coast to coast felt closer. Car interiors were steel and vinyl. No cup holders, no airbags. Leave it in the sun, and the steering wheel could fry an egg. In 1952, the first barcode patent was granted. It looked like a bullseye and sat in science fiction territory for 2 decades before catching on. Most homes had one phone and one number. If it rang, you ran. And if your teen tied up the line, you just hoped the caller would try again. There was no voicemail. Sidewalk chalk wasn't store-bought. You made it from a white rock, turned driveways into racetracks, hopscotch boards, and works of art that washed away with the first rain. Every town had a soda fountain or lunch counter. You sat on a red stool, ordered a cherry Coke or grilled cheese, and spun around while the waitress yelled your name like she'd known you forever. Because she probably had, even if you came from the other side of the tracks.